بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. By the name of Allah, the most merciful, the giver of mercy. Um, so today would be kind of our initial lesson or meeting after the introduction regarding our intellectual dimension of Islam. And today we'll be talking about language, because it's very important and we would know why after today's lesson. Now, let's consider this question, which is, what is your name? Let's just start with that. Why do we actually ask what is your name? What does this have to do with straight thinking? What is a name? Okay. Um Now, when talking with somebody or talking about somebody in a good or in a bad way, how would you define who you're talking about? W- I mean, when we talk about something, we always have this mental image. Okay. If I, for example, say a house, then just kind of a generic house image comes to the mind. It's like an imagination. We call it an imagination. It's an image that comes to the mind, a concept comes to the mind. But when I say my house, then if people knows my house and how it is, they would imagine my house. If I say a car, then I would imagine a generic car. But if I say my car and people know my car, then my car's image will come to their mind. So the same thing, if I say just a human or a man or a woman, a boy, a child, just a generic image will come to the mind and they would recognize the species kind of, but they wouldn't like um, specify who it is. But when naming, when saying the name of something, then what comes to the mind is that specific image of that person or that thing. So names help us to recognize um, things, to specify them, and narrow them down to what we're actually talking about. And recognizing things and like making them specific, that's one of the first steps for a straight thinking mind to start judging things. And judging doesn't mean judging in a bad way. Judging just, we do judging all the time. Like if I want to, if I want to go, for example, outside my house, I can't do that if I don't judge that, okay, I'm on the top stairs, I'm on the top floor, I need to go down. That's me judging where am I. I can't go down if I don't judge where the directions is and where the stairs are. I cannot go outside if I don't judge where is the wall and where is the door. So judging means recognizing, means giving a distinction between something and another thing. And this is very important because if I want to judge, for example, between water and alcohol, and we will actually have a full entire chapter of this later, an entire like lesson or lessons about this later, but I need to know the characteristics of that thing. So the sum, the group of those characteristics, I would call them a name. And so the same thing for humans, for example. I know a person that has one, two, three, four, five, six, you know, 10, 20, 100 characteristics. He's from that country. He looks like this. That's his skin color. That's how he talks. That's how, what he believes in, and so on and so forth. And all of those characteristics groups together, and that person's name is John or Dave or Muhammad or whatever it is, Abraham. And so now when I mention the name, all of those characteristics will come to the mind, and now that person's image is in my mind. I am seeing it in my mind, I am imagining it, and that's how I think. Now I can, bring for example, if they say, okay, is that person is a good person or a bad person? Well, who is it? It's Muhammad. Okay, but Muhammad who? The Prophet Muhammad. No, he's a good person. Why he's a good person? Because he have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20, 100 characteristics that are all considered good characteristics. So judging has to be defined. And how do I define things? By knowing their characteristics. How do I group those characteristics? Is throughout the name. So straight thinking needs language, and we would understand why just in a second. Now, um, so for us, in order to know our need for something, we must first to know its function. Okay, and every function has a characteristic or set of characteristics to which we point and then gather under a name. That's mainly what it is. Um, and so the name benefits us by allowing us to distinguish between different matters, different meanings, different images, different groups of characteristics. So each thing would be different than the other. And therefore, um, for example, when we want to talk about a person, that person's name is so and so, and that name points at the entity, point at the self of that person. So what is that person's name? For example, my name, Sohaib. Okay. Now that's the name that actually gathers all the characteristics. Now, for example, when we talk about God, why do we say, and as I said before, those lessons doesn't have to be religious. Those are about the mind, but because we are religious people, we'll give examples about God, okay, and to understand better, to kind of link things together. But anybody can listen to those lessons, and I encourage you to ask questions, even to stop me to ask questions, because this is important. Now, why do we say about the attributes of God that they are the names of God? When we say, um, the 99 beautiful names of Allah, those things aren't names, those things are attributes, those things are qualities. Well, the reason behind the Muslims saying that and the Quran saying al asma, the names, is because those qualities, when they reach to their utmost level, when you say who is the strong, you would immediately have the concept or the idea of God in your mind. So it's immediately a pointing to God. Like when you say Allah or God, you immediately appoint to the concept of God or to I don't want to say the image because God doesn't have an image, because image is a created thing. But you immediately, you know, God comes to the mind. So the same thing when you start talking about those qualities, you would say the strong. Well, it's a quality, but because it reached to the utmost level of its, um, characteristic regarding God. Now, when you say the strong, God comes to the mind. That's why it kind of turned into a name. Whenever you say it, you don't only talk about the quality itself, but now God comes to the mind also. that who is the strong Allah or God. So they became like names. They point to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. And so um and because we talked about characteristics, so everything has a characteristic. This grouping of characteristic, which we actually call it something. So for example, if I have a table has many characteristics. It's, for example, could be made of wood. That's one characteristic. It has a flat surface. That's a second characteristic. It is normally like has the surface is risen from the floor. It has like three or four or more legs so that it can stand, and it's durable to put things on. So all of those are characteristics. When we look at them, we group them together. Now we name them something and we call it a table. Now, from those characteristics we can create a definition. And that's where definitions come from. Definitions are, you know, words that make you understand and conceptualize or imagine the thing we're talking about by mentioning or listing the characteristics we have regarding something. So the name carries the definition because it carries the characteristics. And the definition is a listing of distinguishing characteristics of something. And imagine what? If those characteristics vanish, that object changes or vanishes. Like if the characteristics vanishes or changes, that thing also vanishes and changes. So for example, um, when I'm talking about, let's say, cloth, okay? Cloth is a name, is a noun, and it could be anything, any kind of fabric, any, you know, woven fabric. Now, if I say cloth, just a generic image of cloth comes to the mind. If I say, for example, a t-shirt, well, that's totally kind of different characteristics. No, but it has more characteristics, more definition into it. So the image changes. So, for example, if I ask a person, do you wear cloth? They would say yes, but that's so generic. But if I say, do you wear a t shirt? They would say, yes, I do. Now, if I define more specifically, for example, if I say, do you wear a yellow t shirt? They would say, for example, no, I'm wearing a blue t shirt. So when defining changes, some characteristics are added to be more specific, or characteristics disappear from something, that thing changes. Okay. It depends on the amount of characteristics uh, put or taken or changed. So, for example, if I hold in my hand some kind of cardboard sword, it is so different from a metal sword because cardboard sword is just for fun and a metal sword will actually do some damage. So the entire, behavior changes now. Why? Because some characteristics changed. And so if all characteristics vanishes, then the entire subject, the entire object vanishes. And that's what it is about creatures before they have been created, before they have been given their characteristics by God, before God defines them and make them exist. We were nothing. We were vanished. We were non existent because we didn't have any characteristics. But then God gives characteristics, God creates, God defines, and then we exist. So it's very important. Now, still, we don't understand why language is important. I mean, we probably now do a little bit, but let's get into this. Um, what is a name? A name is literally a conventional placement whose meaning and characteristics put by people, which kind of mutually recognize. So in Arabic, why do we call something, for example, um, ahmar means in English red. Why do we call it ahmar? And in English, we call it red. It's just a conventional placement. It is something people mutually have agreed upon that when you look at this frequency, when you look at this kind of thing visually we are seeing right now, we are going to be calling it red. Therefore, whoever plays with the language, no matter what the language was, as long as it's mutually conventional to people, when you start corrupting language, you are corrupting the mind. Because imagine if you're on the on the traffic lights, and conventionally we agree that when it's red we stop, when it's green we go, and you start corrupting the language and the meanings in the language and in the words, what's going to happen here? Well, they would think that green means stop and red means go, and corruption happens, means accidents happens, death happens, injury happens. So the same thing when we start playing with the conventional meaning of, for example, men and women, faith, and so on and so forth. So language is a conventional placement, is a conventional placement that actually um, whose you know meaning and characteristics people have mutually recognized. The purpose for that is communication. So what is communication? Communication is when you have an image in your mind, when you have a concept in your mind, when you have a meaning in your mind, and you want to convey it to another person. How do you do that? By language. That's what communication is. So when we start corrupting language, we are actually corrupting the mental image and the mental judgment on things. So we are destroying everything. We're destroying human, we're destroying society, we're destroying anything possible that touches that human. Do you have any questions, guys? Okay. So also know that a name, as we said before, is a description of a characteristic or a relation. What does that mean? I mean, we are getting ahead of ourselves, but because we will study those things later also, we will learn them, we will get into them. We hopefully get into discussions about them and understand them more and more and get deeper and deeper into them, which is logic, which is how the mind works, which some people say, well, some things these days have no logic. It's impossible. Otherwise, you wouldn't understand them. Even like quantum things, you wouldn't be able to scientifically annotate them and record them and track them if it wasn't logical. because when causality goes away, that's it. The mind has no mean to understand anything. So logic gets into everything, and we will study that. Um, but I said that a name is a description of a characteristic, which we understand now what's a characteristic is, or a relation. What is a relation? For example, a name of the word father means the one who preceded the son, and the son is a description, it's a name for an entity that came after the father. So it's a relationship, one before and one after. So, for example, this kind of um, logical dilemma that some people actually play with, they say, can you actually be, you know, go back in time before your grandfather and be the father of your grandfather? And then your grandfather will, will give birth or begotten your father, and then your father, you know, because of him, you're in life. Well, it's exactly like saying your father is before, that's what father means in relation, and then you are after. So can you be after and before at the same time for something? So it's a contradiction. Okay, that's why it's impossible. Can you be before and after yourself like your father? Which it doesn't make any sense. So a name carries a characteristic of something and also carries relations of things. Okay. Um, and throughout it, we understand existence and non existence. We understand relationships. Okay. Um, the function of the name or the function of a name is that it brings forth the mental image of a thing or a meaning. So, kind of, the name is a vessel for a concept or an image. Okay. Um, and language is a composition. What is a language? It's some words aligned together in a certain logical way so that you understand it correctly. And so, language is a composition that achieved by arranging relations between concepts or meanings. So you have concepts and meanings, and you arrange them in a certain way with some helper, other conventional things we put in place to convey characteristics or relations. And that's how we understand the context. Because now our concepts in mind and our image in mind arranges in a certain way, which we understand because of it, the reality we are in. And so this is very important, utmost important, because without it, we cannot convey any meaning. Um, and how is it that like it's an arrangement? Like if we say, for example, let me think of an example here. Um, so, for example, the example I gave in Arabic is this: um, Maryam bint or bint Maryam means Mary is a girl, or if you reverse it, it will become um, the girl of Mary. So the first one means Mary is the gender is she's a girl. The second one means the daughter of Mary. Daughters, Mary's daughter means, okay? So it's an arrangement. It's how you arrange it, how you put things together, how you attach them, how you make those relations between them. Because now we're talking about concepts, and we will talk about that later too, inshallah. Um, so we will come now to this point that language is used to transmit concepts and meanings. So you transmit concepts and meanings from one time, place, or person to another. That's why you need language because language can be spoken or written. And because I need to convey what I know, what I have in my mind, which we'll talk about thoroughly later, inshallah. What I have in my mind, like right now, how can I get it to you? How can I transmit it to you by language? So if my language, like right now, is correct, you would understand what I'm talking about. What's in my mind as an image will get into your mind as the same or very close image. So now we have kind of making our both images in our minds near to identical or identical. And that's how you understand me and I understand you. So we are transmitting concepts or meaning or image by characteristics, by conveying those characteristics. So we can convey it or transmit it through time. It can be written and then another generation reads it. Can be transmitted through places. So right now I'm talking from one place and another person, another place is listening to it, or I can write like a mail and I can send it, or an email, or um, if a person is in front of me, still he's not me, and so for him to get the image or the concept of the or the meaning that I have in my mind, I need to convey that or transmit that with the conventional placement we have mutually agreed upon to communicate, which is language. So language is very important. So the correctness of information depends on the correctness of that language, of that communication. Again, the correctness of information depends on the correctness of that communication. And also, the correctness of information depends on the correctness of conception and the judgment of things, which means if I want to judge something, if I want to give my judgment on something, I need to understand it correctly. I need to know it correctly. Therefore, when we go, for example, to the court, the judge cannot judge anything without evidence. And those evidence are what? Those evidence are a communication to convey the image, to convey what was there, at the crime scene, for example, because information needs to be conveyed to the judge. That's why they have, you know, an investigation. That's why they try to use the labs to extract information like fingerprints and so on and so forth. It's all about information. It's all about transmitting and communicating information. Because without correctness of information, you cannot have a correct concept. You cannot have a correct judgment on things. Therefore, your actions will also be corrupt. And that's one of the reasons why the extremist people they have corrupt actions because their judgment on things are corrupt because their information and their concepts are corrupt. So language is very, very important. It is part and a tool of straight thinking. It is not straight thinking itself, but it is the tool, the essential tool for straight thinking. Otherwise, straight thinking will stay in you if you have straight thinking. And so, just to finish this off, I will give you two examples of what happens if language is corrupt. The first one, I would call it the story of the blind man's guide. And let's imagine that there is a blind man walking the street, and a person, you know, is also there in the street watching that blind man. And that person, let's imagine for the first scenario, has a corrupt mind, has a non straight thinking mind. So the blind person is walking, and the man shouts, "Stop!" So the blind person stops. What's going on? Well, there is a huge hole in front of you. The blind person's, just, freaks out and tells the seeing man, "What should I do? Where should I go?" So the person who sees tells the blind man, "Well, turn to the right and start walking to the right." And the man does that exactly, and the man falls into the hole. Why that happened? Because the man has a corrupt mind, has a corrupt thinking. The hole wasn't in front of the blind person, the hole was on the right of the blind person. So, because the judgment of that person is wrong, that person fell into the hole and he's injured or dead because of corrupt language. Well, because of corrupt thinking, because language stems from the thinking. The second scenario of the same story, the man has correct, like straight thinking, but the language is not straight for some reason. The same thing will happen because the man will guide that blind person in a wrongful way. The blind person will also suffer. So the second story is, I call it the story of the size of the egg. What is that? A person went to Africa or to Asia, and there he saw an egg of um, this big bird, the ostrich, and the egg was big. And so he came back to his people, to his friends, and he said, "I have seen a very small egg." So they asked, "How small?" He said, "This small." And he points, or he like make a gesture in his hand bigger than his head. So people said, "That's big, not small." He said, "Whatever, big, small, it's this size." So what's happened here? Because communication is wrong, because the language is corrupt, conveying of information is corrupted too. So it's very important. Language is one of the most important tools of the mind, of thinking. And our teacher, Sheikh Ali Juma, says that um, الفكر واللغة وجهان لعملة واحدة, means um, the thought and the language are two sides of one coin. They cannot be separated. Do you have any questions? So I'm done for today. Um, do you have any questions, guys? Cool. We're warming up. We hopefully in the future, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah, Allah allows us to continue this and things will start like connecting together. Um, if you have any questions now or later, even when I'm explaining, try to communicate, try to ask, try to expand the concepts, um, try to think about it, because when we interact and have what I call it companionship with a thought, that thought gets bigger and bigger and stronger. That's why this is one of the keys, that if you have a thought and it's bugging you, just don't think about it. Even when it glances in your mind, don't pay attention to it. Don't look at it. Don't analyze it. Don't do anything with it. And it will become smaller and smaller and goes away and vanishes. But if we do that to the information we have, it will also vanish. So if we have something important and we want to keep, we need to pay attention to it. We need to analyze it. We need to have companionship with it, and it will grow larger and larger. So that's an important concept we need to understand, both in the mind, both in the way of Allah, in anything. We can use it for good thoughts and bad thoughts oppositely. Okay? See you inshallah in the next week if Allah allows us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.